my honor. We back at it again. Persist. I'm a warrior, baby. I got too much pride to fall back on this one. Yeah. Let's go. Look at me now. I'm way ahead of your style. I'm at the top and I ain't finna come down, cause I won't hesitate to let y'all know who the prince is. Now before this honor, I can never be the witness. Now mind your business before it gets tense. I hear you dropping them dimes, ain't talking 10 cents. Look, I'm a warrior, so disrespect me, then I'll hit you with the pound, now you trending. I'm a warrior, I'm a warrior, I'm a warrior. Death before this honor, ain't no honor like this. I'm a warrior, I'm a warrior, I'm a warrior. Death before this honor, ain't no honor like this. Yeah, my pride is all I got left. I was doing so right, but then I got left with the ounce of this jealousy that they got from me. Claiming you're real, but all they doing is mocking me. Listen, that's robbery, I don't condone that.
So in blue, we have the Afroasiatic speakers, mainly in northern and eastern Africa. That would include, for example, Semitic speakers, who are also in the Middle East, and also Cushitic speakers from East Africa. In red, we have Nilo-Saharan speaking people, mainly in Central and Eastern Africa. These would be, for example, mainly pastoralists like the Maasai. Then we have people who speak Niger-Kordofanian languages. One of the most common subfamilies or subgroups are the Bantu languages. And they're thought to have originated in Nigeria or Cameroon within the past 5,000 years.
In the Perry-Common era, notice here that we have a map, very bad map, but showing the expansion of Bantu languages. We have in Northern Africa, we have this Carthage and the various ethnic groups known by the literature of the time, from the Romans and the Greeks, the Gatulis, the Garmantes. Of course, we have late Egypt at that time. The arrows coming from the pink going to the center, suggestion of Nubian Christianity. There are churches that have been found around the Lake Chad area, okay? I mention this because some people say, and I was pleased that Dr. Tishkoff did not say, people will say that the PN2M2 lineage represents the expansion of the Bantu sub-branch of Niger-Congo. True enough, many of them had this lineage, but the actual lineage itself is older. If you think back to that chart that I showed you, the PN2, the M2 mutation downstream from PN2 is about 18,000 years old. And that 18,000 years is much older than any Bantu language. A moment. In this particular chart, and this has been revised, the PN2 transition is given a date of about 28,000 years, and you can see this here. So you say, well, that's a long time ago. Again, I'm talking about genealogy and a concept of interconnectedness. I'm not talking about overall genetic similarity, which, based on a serial founder effect and other things, I would not necessarily be necessarily close anyway.
But a pedestal, you below that. You ain't a warrior, that don't impress me. I dare ya motherfuckers to...
The idea that Europeans came in through North Africa is very firmly fixed. But Stephen Oppenheimer's evidence does not support this.
Genetic evidence completely does not support it. There's no evidence of the early branches, and in fact only one of the main branches that people the world is found in the European region. Now, of course, that does upset a lot of fixed views about the origins of the Europeans and forces us to consider the fact that Europeans were part of the same single family that came out of Africa through the southern route. This new genetic evidence will rewrite European prehistory.
Cause I came into this game, me and my lonesome, willing to burn these motherfuckers and toast them, willing to break them in half so I can show them, never mess with a prince that was chosen to save the world from these.
Scientists have always thought our ancestors migrated from Africa many times, group after group, and it was believed they always went north via Egypt and modern Israel. But the DNA trail tells a different story. Professor Stephen Oppenheimer is one of the world's foremost authorities on current genetic research into DNA tracking. By putting together the genetic tree with prehistoric weather patterns, he is one of the first to come up with the extraordinary idea that our ancestors came out of Africa by a single southern route.
This beach is on the west coast of the Red Sea, the African side. Over on the other side, we can see the mountains of the Yemen. I believe this is where our ancestors crossed on the first stage of their journey to the rest of the world. These straits are known locally to fishermen as the Gates of Grief because of the terrible, fierce currents crossing. But 80,000 years ago, the sea level was 150 foot further down. As a result, a number of islands and reefs appeared, which allowed our ancestors to cross, as it were, on stepping stones, over to the Yemen.
Haters that try to clone this, tell them I'm ready, let's get it, listen, I'm focused. So if you step to me like a brave.
There are two routes out of Africa. The north of the Red Sea, across the Suez and into the Middle East, and here in the south, across the Gates of Grief, into the Yemen, and on through the South Arabian coast to India. Both routes are possible, but to get through to the north, our ancestors would have had to have crossed the Sahara Desert. And at the time, it was even drier than it is today. Here in the south, all they had to do was to cross this short stretch of water, only 10 miles across, to the Yemen. So this was a region they could go to with confidence. I think this beach is very important in human history because I think this is the place that our ancestors crossed from Africa to the Yemen on the first step of their journey to the rest of the world. And this was the only place that they had a successful exit from Africa.
Then it's all right being under the graveyard. I'm a warrior.
Group, maybe maximum about 250 persons. They would have been scattered around in family units of 5 to 20, but networking with the other groups in the population. Anything less than about 200 would not have been viable. They would not have been able to cope with epidemics of disease or famine.
We know Eve and her daughters were among the survivors because from them are descended everyone in the world outside Africa. The new science of tracking is a breakthrough. Using the single unbroken mitochondrial genetic line, scientists constructed a vast family tree, pinpointing the markers, fixing them by time and place. It shows that once outside of Africa, our ancestors split up. Some going north and west, some going east and south. Once they had left Africa and the Yemen, they went their separate ways, never to meet again.
When the group first arrived here, they would have had a selection of African lines. A group of 250 people may have had at least 5 or 6 different lines. But over 1,000 years, if this population stayed isolated, gradually those lines would have reduced and reduced. The total number of the population would have stayed the same. It's rather like a Welsh village, hill village, or a village in Italy, where after a number of generations, everybody gets to have the same surname. This process of reduction of lines is called drift, and it happens in all small, isolated communities.
The smaller and more isolated a group is, the faster the mitochondrial DNA line comes down to one. Not to one person, or even to one group, but one mitochondrial DNA line. Some women have no daughters. Some daughters don't survive. So in the end, only one line is left. Totally isolated, they could breed only amongst themselves. The genetic map shows it would take about 1,000 years for the mitochondrial line to be reduced to one. One genetic lineage shared by all non-African people everywhere throughout history. It's this single line that convinces Stephen Oppenheimer he is right about our ancestry.
I think the implications of the single exodus from Africa are enormous. For a start, there's a simple observation that Australians, New Guineans, Southeast Asians, Chinese, Native Americans, Europeans and Indians all come from the same small group. That means that this small group, in the last 80,000 years, has diversified enormously into completely physically different populations in different parts of the world that have adapted physically and culturally to the new environments that they've found and they've explored.
Oh, Pete, are you selling your anvil?
Yeah, I've had a lot of good times with this thing. Oh, $1!
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, N, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now I know my ABCs, 26 letters from A to Z. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, N, V, W, W, X, Y, and Z. Now I know my ABCs, 26 letters from A to Z.
And belong to our genetic Eve. Professor Christopher Stringer, Britain's leading paleoanthropologist, was involved in the dating of the earliest modern human skulls.
This skull is as close as we can get to what the face of mitochondrial Eve would have looked like. It's a very complete skull found in sediments in a cave dating from about 120,000 years ago. And we can see here that it's a modern human. We've got a high rounded vault to the skull, a face that's tucked in under the cranial vault.
And this is what she looked like. Using forensic reconstruction techniques, muscle and flesh have been added to the skull and provide us with the very first glimpse of how our genetic mother might have looked 150,000 years ago. This is the closest we can get.
Expect them to look the same 10,000, 20,000 years ago. I'll go back.
Yeah, if I could just say something about the fossils. No, ancient humans 15, 20,000 years ago, none of them really look like us. If you do if you put just modern humans, if you put them in a statistical analysis with Homo erectus, okay, they look like us. If you put them in a just modern humans or modern humans and Neanderthals, and you use Upper Paleolithic fossils from Europe and fossils from Africa, such as we have them, and if you then use the modern groups of the world, including the San, none of the fossils fall into those groups, because enough gracilization has happened in the last 10, 15,000 years to really change enough of what our skulls look like.
True.
I don't know, Chris, would you want to add to that?
Well, I'd just add that, yes, we talked about this earlier, but it's possible that some dental features may go back and traceable, maybe 50,000 years back. But I think if you have the skulls, as you say, of those individuals, they won't look like their modern counterparts. Their teeth may resemble them more greatly. But physically, yeah, everyone 10 or 20,000 years ago didn't look much like their modern counterparts. And that's true of, obviously, of Native American skulls that are 10,000 years old. They don't look much like modern Native Americans. Even in Australia, there's big changes.
Yep. Yep.
So, for example, if you are Fulani, Muslim, and you are traveling across the Sahel and the Sahara, with your cattle over a 10, 15-year period, you could run into some of the Baggara Arabs. You know about this fight in Darfur, this struggle in Darfur. But if they lose their cattle, those Baggara Arabs may join your group, and over a generation they may become Fulani. So you have now gotten some different male lineages from a different place. The reverse happens as well. If you look at the Baggara Arabs in the Sudan, in Darfur, phenotypically they are almost indistinguishable, usually but not always, from the other people, the Fur, the other people. But their Y chromosome lineages are M89, which is what you find in the Near East amongst Semitic speakers. So here's the clear evidence of Arab tribes, Arab peoples coming in to Africa and occupying the ecological niche of the Sahara. We'll talk about that maybe in a second. Now, actually, they're committing fratricide. They're actually related. Here's an interesting situation and an interesting irony. The Chadic language family is one of the coordinate branches of Afroasiatic. There are now 6 branches: Ongoda, Semitic, Berber, Ancient Egyptian, Cushitic, Chadic, and Semitic. At one time, the Chadic language family was excluded from from Afroasiatic because of the way Chadic speakers looked. How could you have these, quote, Negroes, these black people, in a family, linguistic family, where everybody else is light skinned, or, quote, to the minds of certain people, these are white people. So Chadic was said, it can't be a member of this family. It can't be. It can't be. This is what people thought. Even though there have been other scholars, interestingly enough, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, who said, no, these languages seem to be related, Hausa and other Chadic languages. Well, there's an irony here, and the irony is this. The R1 lineage, which is an M89 lineage, if you think back to the tree, comes from the Near East in the current estimations of these things. So it is very interesting and odd that the black members of the Afroasiatic families, are the darkest ones, actually are the ones that have the Near Eastern Y chromosome in high frequency, sometimes 95%. So how do we explain that? It's very interesting. Well, is it possible that there were actually people that color living in the Near East? Is it possible that these men came and just totally got absorbed? I don't believe at all that this haplotype has anything to do with the spread of the Chadic languages. I think the Chadic languages were already there. And in fact, the mitochondrial DNA gives another story for those who use these single systems. One paper attempted to attach them to the Cushitic languages coming from the East, and there's some archaeological data that speak to this. So here you have an interesting irony, an interesting situation that doesn't make sense. Now, there's another historical thing that's interesting about this. There's a German historian who's not well loved because he's a diffusionist, but I'm not going to simply dismiss him because of that. He feels that he has good data, or that he's done the correct analysis. And he believes that in the 7th century, with the fall of Assyria, that Assyrian migrants came to the Lake Chad, northern Nigeria region. He believes it seriously, and he publishes his papers. They're published in Nigeria. And he says that studying certain myth cycles, the pre-Islamic things in Nupe and other places, that he thinks he sees a redeployment of Assyrian festivals in African terms. The issue is not whether I believe that or not. The issue is that this is another possible explanation for the presence of these R1 lineages. Now, we could talk about microsatellites and stuff to talk about diversity. That's all well and good. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't work, in my opinion, later. Okay. The summary is this: African peoples
big picture of ancestral genetic analysis. Is there an Aryan marker there? Is there anything that indicates the existence of a pure Aryan race?
No, not at all. Not at all. We are all part of this big tree that have emerged out of Africa. And all the types that you can see today are branches of this tree.
There is no Aryan marker because there's no Aryan race. There's no biological or genetic or even any scientific legitimacy for this idea of an Aryan race or a pure Aryan-blooded person.
This is the tree of humanity. Okay,
Geneticist Raj Ramasar has used these differences to help build a global family tree by tracing genes down the female line. Our modern genes are the branches of the tree, and geneticists have followed them back in time to find our ancient roots. The DNA of everyone alive today fits somewhere on this tree, although it's not always obvious exactly where you fit.
So, Stephen, what about you? Where do you think your maternal heritage stems from?
Probably Southern Europe. Just the Italian community, that's where my family comes from.
Well, actually, you are on a European branch, but you're on a European branch up here. And that's much more Northern Europe. So I'm very sorry, Stephen, you're not Italian, you're a Laplander.
But follow the branches back to the beginning, and the tree reveals that ultimately we all have our roots in the same place.
There's no question from the genetic data that is generated on the people here, as well as other studies that have been done, that humanity arose in Africa. And that's where the depth of this thick trunk illustrates where the majority of humanity can look for its roots.
So because we originated in Africa, there's been more time for branches to develop here than there has been anywhere else.
Yeah, that's a crucial point. Humanity has spent most of its life in Africa.
I'm African.
Yes, my cousin. We all are.
Absolutely. It's only more recently that we see this aspect of the tree.
But the really amazing thing is what the tree tells us about those who left Africa. You might expect lots of branches, lots of genetic lineages leaving Africa at different times. But instead, the rest of the world connects back to Africa through one thin branch. What does that mean?
There was a single branching out of Africa. It amounts to historically a single band of individuals leaving the African continent. So that was the original migration out of Africa that we can track with DNA. From there were branchings out in many different directions, into Europe, into the rest of Asia, Eurasia to the north, and then down to Australia and Japan, and ultimately to the Americas on the other side.
Geneticists across the world have come to the same conclusions. Everyone outside Africa descends from not many, but just one tiny group of pioneers.
I just think it's absolutely remarkable.
So she set about launching a remarkable scientific experiment. It eventually took 2 years to complete. An international team led by the University of New South Wales and the Children's Cancer Institute sequenced the DNA of 4 Kalahari Desert Bushmen and 1 man from the ethnic Bantu group. That man happened to be Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Scientists found the Bushmen and the Bantu are the most genetically diverse people in the world, with more than 1 million genetic variants compared to European DNA.
Europeans represent a very young population group in genetic terms. Europeans have only had around 40,000 years to change. And the Bushmen, for example, in the study, they represent a lineage that's believed to be about 100,000 years old.
Looking back into one of the world's oldest societies means
I said I would use the Y chromosome as scaffolding because it's frankly easy to talk about. Let me just say that. If you look at this phylogeny, this is like a family tree, a genealogy. You see that A and B is essentially confined to Africa, and that the E haplogroup and its underived YAP marker are in Africa, and as well as the underived YAP marker being outside. The YAP marker is very interesting for the following reason in terms of our thinking. For those people that think that identities or phenotypes, physical complexes, all line up with particular lineages, the Y chromosome genealogy shatters all of that, because on any of these lineages, you can find individual males. This is the non-recombining part of the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome genealogy shatters the myth that there are coherent lineages related to phenotype. So let's look at haplogroup A, for example. You find it scattered all around Africa. It's recently been revised, the deep-rooting clade, so this tree is not the correct one anymore. So you find people in Morocco who look like the Berbers that I showed you. You find Shilluk in the Sudan. You find people in Central Africa, the Batwa people, all having, I didn't say high frequency, but you can find percentages that have A, the same for B. The E haplogroup, though, is the major haplogroup in Africa, and it basically explains variation all over the continent. The E haplogroup is defined by the M96 mutation, and I will show you how it breaks down in a moment.
Believes the pattern of African Y chromosomes puts his birthplace somewhere in the Great Rift Valley region of East Africa, perhaps Tanzania or Ethiopia. He thinks this is scientific Adam's homeland, his Garden of Eden. Genetics can date the ancient Y chromosome mutations to calculate the age of scientific Adam. Wells believes he was born around 60,000 years ago. It sounds ancient, but it means our search for a common ancestor has not led us all the way back to a time of ape men. The critical discoveries of where and when Adam lived prove he could not have looked like this. For the first time, it's possible to paint a new portrait of Adam based on science. Facial reconstructions have shown what other ancient humans might have looked like. We have images of earlier beings, like Homo erectus, and the ancient pre-human known as Lucy. These faces are all based on fossil skulls, but there are no intact skulls from Adam's time. There is a man who can give a face to Adam, even without his skull. Frank Bender calls himself the recomposer of the decomposed. He's a forensic artist, a specialist at bringing the dead to life. Bender works regularly for police departments around the world, giving faces to human remains, even when the skulls are almost missing. Adam's skull is missing, but been 40,000 years. As humans evolved, the shape of our skulls changed. Brow ridges shrank, the forehead became more vertical, the chin more prominent. Adam should be almost halfway between this ancient man and humans like us. Bender needs to find that midpoint. He needs a modern face to compare to the ancient skull. But not just any face. He wants someone whose lineage traces most directly back to Adam. Wells knows where to look. In East Africa is a little-known tribe called the Hadzabe.
Spencer, Donna.
Their DNA links them almost straight back to Adam.
Donna.
They give us a glimpse into his world. And they point to what Adam could have looked like. Scientific Adam should be a midpoint between the ancient Kafsa face and one of these faces. Like the Hadza chief Julius Hendaya ne Ume. But how do you blend the two with the Hadzabe chief? The computer compares the two sets of data, faces separated by 100,000 years, and generates the midpoint, a blueprint of Adam. A printer converts the computer model into a 3D head. Layer by paper-thin layer, the head emerges. Bender will use this as a template to finally give Adam a face. But the Hadzabe can do more than show what scientific Adam might have looked like. They can give us a window into his world. And they reveal clues to what made Adam and his descendants so exceptional. They could give rise to all men on Earth. Mutations on the Y chromosome show that scientific Adam was born around 60,000 years ago. An extraordinary time in human history, a time of crisis. Scientists believe humans were on the brink of extinction. The entire population may have fallen to no more than a couple of thousand. But from this moment of peril, humans begin an astonishing rise. For the first time, art appears. Tools become much more advanced. This new energy and innovation would enable our species to conquer the planet. Something critical had changed in human nature. What triggered it is a puzzle, yet it seems to come just after Adam.
Is it a coincidence? I don't know. Maybe it is, but it's...
Language. Wells believes Adam may have had a brand new ability to use complex speech. Astonishingly, the Hadzabe could show us how Adam spoke.
What? 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 Tisha? Bogo. Bogo. What? What? Simba. Simba, lion.
They speak one of the most intricate languages on Earth. Along with regular consonants, they use a chorus of clicks. Their speech is far more complicated than most modern languages, and that suggests it's been around for much longer. English has around 30 different sounds. Click languages can have over 100. Scientists believe that when humans first began to speak, they may have used clicks like these. We could be listening to Adam himself. Like the bow and arrow, these sounds are simple, but they may point to what gave Adam his revolutionary intelligence. The Hadzabe have allowed us to explore Adam's world, ancestor of every man today. Adam. Without the skull, we can't know for sure what Adam looked like. But a combination of genetic evidence, Bender's forensic skills, and cutting-edge computer software suggests he looks something like this. Thousands of years after the Bible, and hundreds of years after Michelangelo, we have a whole new face for Adam.
I like the expression. He's got a very forceful look.
He's intent on something, maybe taking over the world. You begin to get perhaps an insight into why these guys won out.